Well, I'm back at the Lords, having had a couple of weeks off, recess for Easter, and I want to talk about priorities. I was really excited that my question on non-hate crime incidents was balloted in. It was the opening question on Monday after the Easter recess. And then Prince Philip died. Now, that is just a very sad occasion, and the House of Lords decided to reorganise the agenda and to create a situation where my question would be postponed. But then at the last minute over the weekend they panicked and thought, as the House of Commons were spending all day doing tributes to him, they'd have an all-day tributes to Prince Philip. So my question was dumped, and you could say that's the priority of the nation. You could say that many of the contributions in that 9-hour debate were more about the Lords talking about themselves than Prince Philip. I actually was there for a couple of hours, and to be honest, they were quite moving in some instances and funny, so I don't want to be mean-spirited. But what it meant was that non-hate crime incidents were not discussed. I wanted to say something about what they are, just because I now don't know whether I'll ever get this question raised. But, you know, last week, in fact, it was announced that 2,000 under 17-year-olds have non-hate crime incidents recorded by the police in a file. Under 17, I mean, that amounts to name-calling at school, presumably. And 120,000 adults have got non-hate crime incidents recorded by the police on their database. And what these are incidents that somebody has described as hate crimes, and it's entirely subjective, and the police have to accept them. They don't even have to investigate. They have to record that someone has reported you of a hate crime. Then if there's no evidence of a crime being committed, they keep your name on that list. And if you are going for a job at any time, that will come up in any kind of a criminal records check. How draconian is that? How scary, and what a chilling effect it has. I would have asked something like that of the government minister. He would have made excuses, but that was my first priority question. Prince Philip beat me to it in that one. Maybe more significant, though, there was a 5-hour debate this week given over to by Baroness Lister, who is associated with fighting poverty over the years. She asked a question, started a debate on what the world would look like, a more inclusive, fair world post-pandemic. 5 hours, almost 90 Lords spoke. What was significant was that only one of those, Lord Beith, a Lib Dem of the old school, mentioned the word civil liberties. Two of the Lords actually raised the Sewell Report, in a way the unfair treatment of the writers of the Sewell Report, but also talked about inclusivity, meaning that we want maybe to abandon a kind of racial identity way of understanding the world, and talked about that. And I, of course, talked about the changing relationship between the state and the individual and the lack of freedom. But, you know, I might as well, in terms of priorities, what everybody wanted to talk about was children, poverty, things getting worse, can the state help? But there was no sense, in a way, that the government's having accrued so much power might have any impact at all on the lived lives of ordinary people, that the economic situation post-lockdown is going to be something which is a political issue. Instead, it felt like being in a kind of technocratic, Victorian do-gooders meeting, if I'm honest. And it was 5 hours I won't ever get back in my life. The good bit, I suppose, is that a few of us identified each other as being slightly different and have had correspondence. But in terms of priorities, I cannot get over the fact that freedom is in no one's priority. It just doesn't appear at all, having been in a situation where our freedoms have been, even if you think it was necessary, completely taken from us. So that frightens the life out of me. The other thing was that I put in nominated a debate which I didn't get balloted for, which was on what happened in Batley Grammar School, and the teacher, who is still in hiding, fearful of his life, who's been suspended. In fact, 3 teachers have been suspended because they showed a picture of the Prophet Muhammad. This was deemed to be offensive and hateful by some local activists, and, you know, it caused headlines for a few days. But in terms of priorities, no one in the House of Lords has mentioned Batley. ever. I mean, it just hasn't happened. So does that not count? That seems to me to be hugely important. The Department of Education is represented in the House of Lords. No one's asked a question of them, hasn't emerged. My question wasn't balloted. There's a couple on environmentalism. Guess what? No surprise there. COP26 and environmentalism is all they ever talk about. And my final point about priorities was that I was on Politics Live during the week, and one of the questions we were going to debate was the COVID marshals going around interviewing people having a drink. Also whether home workers might in fact have to be forced to have the vaccine. Both of those items were dropped because what we did was we talked about sleaze for half an hour. Tory sleaze, is it back? And so on and so forth. The reason I'm mentioning that is because right at the end of the item, in which I had broadly said, look, lobbying is something which every politician needs because they need to hear outside voices. Some of them are going to try and go on the make. The David Cameron thing with Greensill is very dodgy, it seems to me. But it's just that for a priority, half-hour discussion, it didn't merit it for me. What was most ironic was that I was there with another member of the House of Lords, and you know, if you want an example of democracy, cronyism, you only have to look at the House of Lords. But somehow this issue of sleaze is identified as the big issue of the day. Right at the end of the discussion, it was quite interesting that the the chair, Joe Copeland, said, oh, well, we've just had it in that when we had a poll on this, only 4% of the population thought it was a priority. And I thought that summed it up. This is a Westminster Village story. It might stick. Tories sleazy, money. Matt Hancock might end up getting done because how many relatives and friends have got contracts. I'm not saying it's good. It's just that I want the politicians to be held to account for the most incredible year in which there are real, genuine scandals about care homes, about the treatment of the elderly, about children still now wearing masks in school, about the closure of the economy. But oh no, everyone wants to talk about whether somebody passed a fast book. And I just think it's the wrong priorities. What have my priorities been this week to finish off? Well, I really, really enjoyed a couple of nights of having a drink with friends. And, you know, people were, commented on social media, said, oh, you just want to go back to the pub and have alcohol. No, actually, it was sociability, face-to-face, chatting to people. It was an absolute tonic. I also went shopping. TK Maxx, my favourite. But it was really nice because there was loads of people in there. We were all hunting for bargains, buying things we didn't need. It felt almost normal. All right, we had masks on, but the rest of it was just, oh, I don't know, something about life slowly coming back, and I really enjoyed it. Politically, I've had lots of meetings this week about the Battle of Ideas, real life Battle of Ideas festivals, the University of Buckingham one on the 17th of July on education freedom, and then the main Battle of Ideas, which I can now tell you is going to be on the 9th and 10th of October in the Westminster area. Very exciting. So I'm actually feeling like real life really is happening because I've got to organise things along with my colleagues at the Academy of Ideas. And the other exciting thing that's happened this week, which I think should be everyone's priority, is that we have got the latest Letters in Liberty have come out. And honestly, they're really excellent. Alistair Donald, my colleague, has written one on the State of the Union in terms of Scotland, and it's really quite a profound provocation as to what's happening in relation to Scottish nationalism, Scottish independence. So I'd really urge you to get that. Remember, these are popular pamphlets. You read them, pass them on to your mates. There's one by Austin Williams on the Greens as the new neo-colonialists. Provocative, absolutely. The Malthusianism associated with environmentalism, he exposes, I think, really well. And then Dolan Cummings talking about conscience, talking about what it means to have to answer to yourself and be accountable to your own conscience. Hugely important, very readable. Do order them, and do already put those dates for the Battle of Ideas Festival. I'm afraid when it comes to the House of Lords, a little bit dispirited because I've realised that their priorities are entirely internally generated and with very little relationship to the needs or wants of the external world.